Introduction to Disaster Risk Management. Module 3. The Role of Local Actors. Session 2. Disaster Risk Management in Cities. This module will focus on what is urban disaster risk, why disaster risk is large and increasing in cities, and how to implement disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction in cities. First, let's discuss why it is important for decision makers and disaster risk management professionals to focus on cities. There are three main reasons. Larger proportion of national populations are increasingly living in urban settlements. Cities play a vital role in a country, and thus interruption in city functioning can affect national economy, stability and growth. Finally, disaster preparedness and prevention efforts in urban areas can target more people and assets than those in rural areas. During the next 20 years, it is projected that over 95% of the population growth in developing countries will take place in urban areas, with the urban populations of Africa and South Asia increasing by an average of 62 million people each year. In East Asia, 500 million urban people will join today's 750 million over the next 25 years. More than half the urban dwellers will continue to live in small cities, with populations less than 500,000. 1/5 of the urban dwellers will live in medium-sized cities of populations 1 to 5 million. These intermediate cities in developing countries are growing at a faster rate than large or megacities and face huge challenges due to relative absence of basic infrastructure services, financial and technical resources. These cities also receive less media attention during disasters. Megacities, which are massive conurbations of more than 20 million people, are gaining grounds in Asia, Latin America and Africa. You learned the concept of disaster risk. Now let's discuss why disaster risk is large and increasing in cities. There are many reasons, including location of cities in hazard-prone areas, growing concentration of people and assets that increase exposure, high urban poverty that affects vulnerability, spatial expansion in hazard-prone areas, and urban management or governance challenges which can induce unwanted human processes such as environmental degradation and technological hazards. Many cities have historically emerged at a location with good accessibility or favorable natural endowments, such as a river, a coastal location, or fertile volcanic soils. These geographic settings are often associated with an increased probability of hazard events, floods, cyclones, and volcanoes. Globally, an estimated 9% of population lives within 100 kilometers of a historically active volcano, with high concentrations in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Central America. Similarly, low-elevation coastal zones, often exposed to cyclones and storm surges, cover 2% of the world's land area, but contain 10% of the world's total population and 13% of the world's urban population. Many cities are located on or near seismic fault lines, rocky or mountainous terrain, or arid plain. Istanbul in Turkey is a good example. Developed on an ancient trade route that connected Europe with Asia, this megacity is near the North Anatolian seismic fault line and has faced many deadly earthquakes throughout the city's history. Urban poverty is high in the cities of many developing countries. More than 1 billion people live in slums. This map shows slum population in urban Asia. About 35 to 60% of total urban population lives below poverty line. The urban poor are among the most vulnerable in a city due to 1. Limited or unstable income base. 2. Poor quality and overcrowded housing. 3. Poor quality, inadequate, or lack of urban services. 4. Inadequate access to social infrastructure such as schools, hospitals, daycare, public transportation, etc. And 5. Limited or no safety nets, such as availability of food and other basic needs when income falls or during any crisis. Disaster risk is increasing as cities expand into hazard-prone areas. This happens either when a city has outgrown its land or when competition for land is intense. In these cases, the urban growth must take place in new areas, such as peripheral areas, open spaces within a city, or reclaimed lands from sea or riverbeds. In majority of the cases, these new urban areas are also environmentally sensitive areas prone to disasters, such as floodplains, and low-lying areas prone to floods, or unstable rocky or mountainous areas prone to landslide. Finally, human actions can lead to environmental degradation and technological hazards. Potential for such hazards remain very high in the rapidly expanding cities of developing countries, which are already grappling with the challenges of urban management and governance. For example, in 2008, landslides killed 119 people in Cairo, Egypt. Reports suggested that leaking sewerage pipes triggered the rock slides in the affected informal settlement, which itself was developed on the periphery of the city over rocky terrain. Another example is a garbage slide in Manila, Philippines, in 2000 that affected the 15,000 residents of Lupang, Pangaco, leaving more than 300 people dead and destroying about 500 houses. The gargantuan garbage mountain was made from dumping 6,000 tons of garbage produced daily in Metro Manila on a contested land claimed by urban squatters, big subdivision owners, and the government. Many factors can impede the implementation of effective disaster risk reduction, and these 5 are certainly among the most important. Lack of mechanisms that mainstream disaster risk reduction within institutional functions. Lack of capacity and inefficient use of resources. Rigid bureaucratic structures not adapted to cross-organizational cooperation and integration. Lack of knowledge of disaster risk factors. And lack of awareness of population and institutions. These factors are correlated, and their combined efforts have made it difficult for cities in developing countries to develop effective means for providing a safer environment. Most often, local institutions and the general public are not aware of the risks with which they live, nor are they involved in developing ways of reducing their risk factors. The integration of disaster risk management functions within local institutions is key to achieving urban risk reduction. Further, effective coordination is needed within the different institutions of the government and with the community. Local government disaster risk management policies should be articulated around a clear vision and should be consistent and supported by the central authorities. The participation of the active agents in society, academia, business, trade unions, media and other institutions and organizations representing civil society would ensure acceptability, sustainability, and the mobilization of resources of the community. It is the cumulative contribution of the full community that will result in a resilient society. The implementation of sound disaster management practices within local government is a difficult endeavor. Hence, an integration strategy should be pursued. Policy should be aimed at integrating the disaster management functions within each service and organization of the local government. Integration also includes the development of partnerships and coalitions and the involvement of the stakeholders. Functionally, good coordination is required to make sure that communication is taking place, control mechanisms are effective, and a voice for advocacy is supporting the effort. Disaster risk reduction is the consequence of coherent disaster risk management policies and action plans that are supported by institutional commitment and that address the root causes of vulnerability. These are issues such as public awareness, education and structural intervention to reduce risk, that is mitigation, such as competent construction standards and sensible urban planning. These elements constitute the corner principles of disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction should also be viewed as a long-term endeavor that needs the support of sustainable mechanisms and anchors of accurate parameters of risk and vulnerability. Implementation of DRM and DRR is challenging, but it is possible, and it has been done by several cities in the world. Research Institute, academia and multilateral organization developed guidelines and helpful references to help cities implementing a resilience action plan. One One good reference is certainly the Hyogo Framework for Action. The HFA 5 priorities that you saw in Module 1 have been declined at local level, and specific actions have been identified to guide local government and stakeholders in the application of the framework. 20 tasks have been identified to facilitate the implementation of the 5 priorities. Actions are clustered under the following chapters: city governance, early warning and risk assessment, knowledge management, vulnerability reduction, and disaster preparedness. Moreover, the UNISDR Making Cities Resilient campaign proposes a 10-point checklist of 10 essentials to enhance resilience in cities and to serve as a guide for commitment by mayors. This 10 essentials checklist builds on the priorities identified in the Hyogo Framework for Action and serve as a guide for commitment by mayors. For example, to become more resilient, a city needs to start setting up a task force to plan and implement the 10 essentials. Take stock of where the city is at on the 10 essentials, then prepare a disaster risk profile and start public communications. It is also very important to develop an action plan for the 10 essentials, mobilizing resources and partnerships for implementation. Raising awareness, training and capacity building on the matter are key to the process. The action plan will also be linked with other relevant city programs. Finally, to assure ownership, commitment and consistency, the local mayor will chair regular reviews of progress. What is the ultimate objective of disaster risk reduction in cities? Why? The ultimate objective of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation is to produce resilient cities. Rather than focusing on anticipating specific hazards, city stakeholders ought to take a broader, integrated approach that addresses both current and future development needs. What really is resilience? Resilience, therefore, takes into account the economic, social, psychological, physical and environmental factors that are necessary for humans to survive and to thrive. Locally rooted strategies to build resilience need to incorporate a strong focus on both disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, and need to be embedded within a city's institutional and organizational framework. There is no need to impose big programs and huge infrastructural investments. Many cities, such as San Francisco, started from small actions, often called no regrets. No regret actions are measures by households, communities, and local, national, and international institutions that can be justified from economic, social, and environmental perspectives, whether natural hazard events or climate change or other hazards take place or not. No regrets actions increase resilience, which is the ability of a system to deal with different types of hazards in a timely, efficient, and equitable manner. Increasing resilience is the basis for sustainable growth in a world of multiple hazards. Even for DRR, access to funds is problematic. Cities should explore the full range of innovative financing and market-based instruments available, including, for example, emissions trading systems for reducing emissions, joint procurement to reducing costs, insurance and financial derivative instruments for managing disaster risk. UNDP and the World Bank recently launched a website to increase access to information on climate finance, climatefinanceoptions.org. This Climate Finance Options platform, launched under the umbrella Acting on Climate Change, the UN system delivering as one, addresses information needs on the multitude of funds available for climate action in developing countries. Based on the UNFCCC framework, the platform is composed of 2 complementary domains, one led by UNFCCC and one by UNDP World Bank Group, both of which will ultimately help to catalyze financial and investment flows, leading to more effective and efficient mitigation and adaptation measures. No program is successful without mechanisms of sustainability. While leadership is important, people move within organizations, and it is therefore important to rely on institutions and not on individuals. Sustainability requires vision, strategy, and systemic long-term planning. It also requires efficient use of the local resources and engagement of all the active agents of the community. Sustainability develops community resilience by turning demand into supply and liabilities into assets. Implementing disaster risk management and achieving disaster risk reduction is a challenging endeavour. Mitigation requires the integration of knowledge from many disciplines, integration of processes through various functions and sectors of the government, and the involvement and participation of many stakeholders. It also requires significant resources and may require decision-making without a clear basis. But one must keep in mind that, in long term, mitigation is good policy because it preserves the assets of a community and improves its human potential. This introductory presentation about disaster risk management in cities pointed out how large and increasing are disaster risks in cities. It has been clearly stated that disaster risk reduction and climate change can be undertaken as a part of a city's resilience agenda that can be mainstreamed into sound urban planning. Start small. No regrets policies increase resilience of the community and are sustainable. Sustainability, strong partnerships, and long-term planning coordination are key to build resilience in any cities. Figures and graphs are from UN Habitat Global Urban Observatory 2005 and from Small and Norman 2001. McGranahan et al. 2007. An art historical tour of Istanbul's quakes. Text adapted from Foaad Bendimirad, The Role of Local Actor, presentation to the e-learning course on Disaster Risk Management, WB1 2003. International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, World Disaster Report 2010. Heltberg, R. P.B. Siegel, S.L. Jorgensen, 2010. Social Policies for Adaptation to Climate Change. Chapter 10 in Social Dimensions of Climate Change, Equity and Vulnerability in a Warming World, edited by R. Mearns and A. Norton. The World Bank, UNISDR, Making Cities Resilient Campaign 2010. UNISDR, Kyoto University, a guide for implementing the Hyogo Framework for Action by Local Stakeholders 2010.